So here we are again. I'm going to do a despair mode video because this is a video game that features a despair mode and many other clever things besides. And while I've seen a lot of people playing this game, and I mean a lot, I've watched a lot of people playing this game on the internet over the last month, I have not seen somebody breaking down piece by piece exactly what the game is doing that is clever. And so I'm going to give that a shot now. No guarantees. But let's dive in. So here we are in the beneath. And there's a lot of, metaphorical signifiers that we could hang on the beneath. There are people who have called this hell. Actually, maybe quite a literal interpolation of hell. And I don't know what Toby Fox's religious background is, but there are enough bits and pieces here and there to suggest that he might have had something like that in mind when it came to building this land. There's also just, being down. Being in the kind of state of mind where you could go and wander around a mountain and then fall right into the pit. I think it's probably necessary to say at this point that if you haven't played this game, there's absolutely no reason why you should be watching this video. But you knew that already, right? Let's get started. So this is the place where the game teaches you its first lesson about what kind of game it's going to be. We have the smiling flower, who wants to know if I don't have anything better to do than to reset this first part and try to make something cogent with it over and over again. But he's just going to go through his routine anyway, because that's his job. And his job is to make a first-time player distrust the game. So normally what would happen at this point is that he would go through his spiel about how the game mechanics works, because he's being a tutorial. And I would then, following his advice, because that's what you do with a tutorial, smash myself into his bullets and be crippled. And since he and I both know that I already know that, we're kind of going through a little charade together here. And so he gets more and more frustrated with me, hoping that I will start playing along again, as is appropriate, and then I don't. And then this happens. And I do know what's going on here. And this is the interesting one. I just wanted to see him suffer. There are a couple of implications that happen, because everything in this game pulls double duty, right? If you're just playing the game for the first time, what this part does is that it puts you on notice that the game is not to be trusted. That not everything that you hear in the game is going to be real. Not only in terms of the plot of the game, but also in terms of how the game wants you to interact with it. The game just lied to you about its mechanics. Which means that from here on, you can't really trust anything the game tells you or shows you. And that's certainly true. And of course, it fills us with ambivalence if we are paying attention about the intentions of Toriel here. So we are on edge about that right off the bat. But if you've already been through it and you know to dodge those friendliness pellets, it puts you on notice in another way. It says, well, if you're still playing this game and you already know what's going on, why are you doing that? Given what you know about this flower and what this flower is doing and what the plot of this game is, why are you coming back here to put him through all of this again? Huh? So, depending on how you play that first section, it establishes the two main villains of Undertale, right? I mean, Flowey is, of course, the main villain of Undertale in a sense, but that's just textually. in terms of the structure, there are two possible villains that this game can have. One is the game itself and its mechanics, and one is you, the player, and your instincts. Your curiosity, your morbid curiosity, the part of you that would tear wings off flies, is on notice. I like this. Only the fearless may proceed, brave ones, foolish ones walk not the middle path. Meaning, of course, that you need to do this, and then this, and do this. But there is never another puzzle in this game where you have to solve a riddle like that. Even this segment with Toriel, which is theoretically a walkthrough, tells you absolutely nothing about what is actually going to be happening in the game. The switches, which we are going to be shown in a second, there are no other switches in the game that look like this, right? And of course, this is my favorite joke of all. That's my favorite joke in the entire game. Followed closely by this sign, which you have to walk off the path to see. That's just pure liquid wonderment to my tastes. I really enjoy a nasty little joke like that. And it's not a joke that the game explains to you, because this is a fault that people have pointed out with this game, that it doesn't really let any of the jokes sit there. It goes back and explains what was funny about what just happened, but not always. The structural jokes are a little more subtle. And one of those jokes is, there's the obvious joke, oh, this switch doesn't even work. I go back, this switch doesn't even work. But the joke that none of this is relevant is sort of the deeper funny. Now we get to experience the combat for the first time. You will need to be prepared for the situation. Blah, 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 blah. You know what this is. Toriel tells you to get into a fight and talk to the monster and stall for time, which is not actually the correct advice, because she, of course, is not going to be with us throughout this game. So even though she is Toriel, the tutorial, very little of the information that she gives us is actually relevant, and none of it is the things that we really need to know in order to play the game correctly, i.e., what this menu does. She doesn't mention that one. All that she mentions is what this menu does, which means that a lot of people end up using this menu in a good-natured attempt to avoid killing anything, but don't figure out that after you do that, you need to hit this button, right? Because the game doesn't really tell you about that. There's a hint, but you might have killed something by the time that you receive that hint, depending on how you worked. Anyway, here's a nice joke. You've probably seen this before. Yee. We don't see these facial expressions on Toriel often enough. One of the reasons that I've done that is because I still don't know what happens later in the game when you talk to the other dummy, if you took that route in the first one, so we'll find out if I get there. So here, of course, is the did you notice that it's a tutorial joke in this room? My first chance to try out what I'm doing here. I will do, let's see. So Toriel told me to talk to it. I'm going to do exactly what the game told me to do. I'm going to talk to the frogget. She comes along. For the moment, everything works exactly as planned. There we go. Now the western room is the eastern room's blueprint. You saw the little path on the ground over there. And we are matching the path over here. Once again, this dynamic never really shows up in the post-tutorial portion of the game. But it's still not something that we can be relied upon to do ourselves. The joke, obviously, is that this is very hand-holdy. And that one is a little bit too obvious to mention, maybe even, but I really enjoy it. I guess I'm a sucker for this kind of thing. It's a joke about the form of what's happening. And the question is, well, that's only that, it's a joke about a tutorial section in a JRPG. What is this game telling us that is broader or wider or more important than that? Cool your jets. So, second thing. This room teaches us, if we want to talk about what is happening in the true tutorial here rather than the fake tutorial that Toriel the goat is coming us through, is that the game can lie to us in another way. It can lie to us via its atmosphere. It can lie to us through its music. This track on the soundtrack is called Unnecessary Tension. So once again, our level of trust with the interface is being tested. And at this point, we're trying to outsmart the game. And what someone might do under the circumstances of trying to outsmart the game that is already actively, and overtly screwing with us, is to just sit in this room and do exactly what she told us to do, because that's obviously not what the game wants us to do, and we're already feeling a little bit, peeved at some of the things that the game is doing. So we can wait here, and if we wait 5 minutes, which I'm not going to do now, tell you what, let's pause the audio recording just for a second. Can I also just say that there is something particularly nice about the fact that there's absolutely nothing that you can interact with in this room. Even the pillar, which feels like it is an object that you should be able to interact with, and when I've seen people playing this game, they immediately try to walk behind the pillar, see what's behind the pillar, click on the pillar, see what's going on there, because it's the only object of interest in this extremely long and featureless room. But no, you can't, even though that's the kind of object that you should be able to get funny flavor text from everything else. This is the most boring room in the whole entire game, and it's the one that we're stuck in while we're waiting for Toriel to be done with her stuff and return. So the game has taught us at this point that if we just do what we're told, we're going to suffer. Whoop. Yep. And if you do demonstrate yourself to be particularly obedient, the game begins to troll you. And you can wait 5 more minutes for another message, and then another 5 more minutes for another message. And then Toby the dog will eat Toriel's phone. Let's move on. Yep. So here's the key piece. Excuse me, human, I have some advice for you about battling monsters. If you act a certain way, or fight until you almost defeat them, they might not want to battle you, or if a monster does not want to fight you, please use some mercy, human. Ribbit. So that is, even though this is a NPC who we were talking to, and I've seen some people avoid talking to this NPC because it looks like an enemy, it doesn't tell you straight out what you actually need to do. It does something cryptic. It highlights the words that match up with the buttons in your action menu, so that you actually have to work a little bit to uncover it in order to figure out how to play the game the quote-unquote right way. And this brings me to a point that I want to make about people who have talked about the morality system in this game. Oh, and here we go, demonstrating once again that you can have an effect on the game. Take one. Fine. Take another one. How disgusting. First, the game judges you, right? And then the game tells you that you feel bad. This is a little microcosm of the entire process of the game right here, right up front, inside the tutorial, just demonstrating what it is that the game is going to do to you. And I think that's just fantastic. You can't say that you weren't warned. But regardless, what I was going to say about the combat system is that there's a way in which this game differs from your standard. There you go. Poor Whimson. There's a way that this game differs from your standard moral choice system, right? Because it's not just a matter of picking thing A over thing B. It's, yes, cinnamon butterscotch. Wait, do not tell me it's butterscotch. Ooh, okay, so guys, here's the first instance of the game giving us a choice, right? We have a yes or no possible dialogue box response, and this is one of many, and it is also the first of essentially all of them where our answer means nothing, right? The game understands that our answer means nothing because the plot of the game is going to unfold essentially in an identical fashion whether we pick yes or no. But it doesn't know that we know that, so it wants to make sure that we know. Is it butterscotch? Yes, it's butterscotch. When humans fall down here strangely, I often feel like I already know them. Okay, it's doing a meta thing with me because I've done this already. Truthfully, when I first saw you, I felt like I was seeing an old friend for the first time. Strange, is it not? Well, thank you for your selection. I wonder what would have happened if I had said no. Hello, this is Toriel. You don't dislike cinema, do you? Yep. But anyway, as a first-time player, what happens there is that you're given a choice, and then at the end, you are given a cinnamon butterscotch pie. So the game tells you right up front, in response to the very first choice that you make, that your choices here are an illusion, and that the game is going to do what it wants to do to you regardless. If you don't get it at this point, then the increasingly baroque and fun ways that Papyrus finds to ignore what it is that you're saying to him drives the point home. But it's here right from the beginning. Nothing that you choose matters. Oop. I'm just going to do that. And we don't actually need to move all the rocks. But we have, with this rock workout, we have distracted me from what I was saying. So, moral choices in video games, often it's a matter of choosing one option or another, just as we did in those dialogue boxes, right? If you choose the Paragon option from the dialogue tree, then you're going to go in a Paragon route. If you choose the bad guy option, if you're going to go Renegade, then that's it. And it's just a matter of pressing one button or another button. So yeah, that's the moral content of this system of choice. The game demonstrates that saying yes or no in a situation like this is as arbitrary as it feels. It only wants choices that require effort to mean anything. And so there's only one instance that I can think of later on where which radio button you actually click on really makes a difference. And that one is in a scenario where you have already expended all of the effort that you possibly could have to get to that point. Which is in itself, I think, a nice little point. These choices where it's a flip of a coin only work if you already have immense power. Currently, we're powerless, and if we want to actually affect the world around us, we have to make a choice. And notably, the good path is a harder choice to make, and is harder to figure out, and is not adequately explained. Whereas the easy path has already been taught us because we've played a million games before that work exactly like the way that this easy path works. So I'm going to stop staring at this snoozing ghost. Here's the thing that I like. Scoscape Zingzi. Move it with force. So if you are, at this point, think that you figured the game out and that you need to do everything pacifistically, you're going to say, no, I don't want to use force. The whole point of this is not to use force. And then you're stuck forever. Another nasty little touch. Like you can't even trust the game to give you the kind of verbal cues that will let you make the right decisions. Because the only way forward here is to threaten this ghost. Do 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 do. So here's an interesting thing. about this particular fight. In interviews, Toby Fox has said that one of the things that he wanted to do with the Undertale combat system was to make a situation where it wasn't just that you were following an arbitrary series of steps with a failure state at every point. He wanted to be sure that you could just, keep trying until you got the right answer, so that it wasn't at no point were you forced, unfortunately, to go the violent route. Whoop, 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 whoop. And that's true for the most part. Usually you can't fuck yourself over completely through a series of bad choices. But for this fight, because it's impossible to kill Napstablook, you can end up in this situation where the only way to end the fight is to fight him because you didn't compliment his hat. That's the unforgivable sin in Undertale, is if you don't say something nice about a depressed ghost's hat, then there's no way forward. And that's done in this instance because you can't actually kill Napstablook, and so you can't screw yourself over this way. But I just think it's interesting that even, once again, early on in the tutorial phase, a thing that you have been able to count on so far, which is that if you just keep trying every option when you're talking to them, that you'll eventually be able to get out alive and spare them. Not always true. And then this gets a lot harder. Oh my god. Yep. Hey, and now I have -1 experience points, which should actually put me in pretty good stead with Sans at the end of the game. Alright, moving swiftly on. I don't have enough money to buy a spider donut, which is a shame because that'll save my life later on. Here we are in the room of 4 frogs. Whoa! This took me forever to figure out. I just want to mention that. This guy is the hive mind. He's a zergling, but if he's alone, he's just a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. And it's a nice joke, but it is one of the jokes that doesn't make a lot of effort to explain itself once again. This frog doesn't show up if you've already demonstrated that you know how to skip dialogue. That's a nice touch. I like that touch. Okay, here's an edge case that I've often wondered about. So, does eating these guys count as genocide? Because they seem to have like ambivalent ideas about whether they want to be eaten or not in the first place. We'll find out in an hour or so whether I have deprived myself of the ability to get the best ending by eating that vegetable monster. We'll find out. But here we are. It's Toriel. So here's the sequence, beginning now, which is the first real gut punch that the game gives you, or tries to give you. And it's really remarkable to me how it seems to work. Like, I've watched many playthroughs of this, as I think that I mentioned, and even people who are massively creeped out by the sequence, and that's definitely a reaction. There are folks who, immediately take Toriel into their hearts because she's good and pure and lovely. And there are people who see the box of kids' shoes and a disparity of sizes here in this room. The creepy fact that there is a child's bedroom already set up in Toriel's home. And immediately just don't want any of what Toriel is selling. But in most cases, even people who are immediately looking for the knife, because the game has already told us via our first encounter with Flowey that even things that look cute can be deadly and terrible. Even though, they don't want to kill Toriel because she's just fluffy and nice. Which is a neat trick for a game to have pulled off. I've seen very few playthroughs where people either, wanted to kill Toriel or were willing to admit that they wanted to kill Toriel at this point. But I think I'm going to proceed how I think the game wants it to be played. Getting the plot that... there we go. Getting the experience that the game intends as it gives you its second big lesson, of course. So we're just going to skip through all of this thing. Good Toriel facial expressions. Asgore. I'm not the first one to make the observation that if Asgore and Toriel had just decided to name their child slightly differently, he would have ended up as Torgo instead of Asriel. And maybe he would have had a different kind of personality. He would certainly have been a very different kind of end boss if it was Torgo Dreamer. But, so the way that people usually play this, people who are, just coming into this game, I think that this is the reaction that the game wants and the reaction that people most often gives. You try to talk to her, you couldn't think of any conversation topics. She tries to barbecue you. This is unfortunate because it's by far the most scary thing that you've had to deal with thus far. We've already been taught that the mercy button has to be yellow for us to use it. We pretty much understand that by this point. And even if we do try to show mercy, we get nothing. Didn't work, so why do it again? And people who are familiar with JRPGs will see that because that there's a progression in the dialogue when you spare her repeatedly, you can probably keep doing that, but, that's not obvious. That is like the opposite of obvious. And people are still gonna want to do this, right? So, eventually, folks are going to resort to hitting Toriel because they have seen in other places that one of the ways to get out of a fight is to get the enemy down to low HP, and then they will not want to fight you anymore. So we're going to keep hitting her. I should probably have picked up the knife if I was going to do this, honestly. Now, people will continue to run through their healing items, but they will probably run through all of their healing items, particularly if they've been playing pacifistically up to this point, and they'll note at this point that Toriel doesn't want to hurt you, and so you're going to feel super bad about continuing to wail on her when she is definitely dedicated to not killing you. And I'm sure you've seen the facial expression that comes out when she does kill you accidentally, which is, difficult to deal with if you're still emotionally engaged with the game at this point. So they think, alright, she's not weak enough yet, we're going back, and then the crit, right? Suddenly you deal more damage than you've ever dealt before. You're trying to chip away at her. You just wanted to, you know, see what the options were. And at this point, you're like, oh shit, I did a bad. And we get the heart-rending dialogue, which you cannot skip through, unlike most of the dialogue in the game. And then, of course, in case we didn't feel bad enough at this point, we're going to get lectured by a murderous flower in just a second. My child. Yeah. So it's turned up to 11 here, right? The game wants you to feel absolutely terrible. And it's not being subtle about it. It is just screaming, you know, you monster at you at this point. And because of how unsettling everything has been up to this point, you take that in. So that's, you know, the surface lesson, you are a monster, which the game wants you to do so that you can then do this whole thing. Go back, load your save, and do it right ways. Let's see what Flowey has to say to us first, though. Wow, you're utterly repulsive. Thanks, you spared her life. Then you decided that just wasn't interesting enough for you. I haven't seen this one before. So you murdered her just to see what would happen. You killed her out of boredom. Right. You naive idiot. Do you think you're the only one with that power? The power to reshape the world purely blah 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 blah. Okay. What happens if I repent of it this time? Is there a layer upon layer option that comes up? But you know what happens, right? If you're not being a dick like I am. Yeah, if you weren't being a dick like me, you ended up... Flowey ends up castigating you for killing her, and then normally what you do then, because he drops a hint that you could reshape your destiny, is to go back and to try to fix it. Because that ending certainly gives you the idea that there was another option. But let's think about what the game is actually teaching us. That crit, the I didn't really want to kill her, I didn't mean to crit. That teaches you that the very environment that you're in is working against you. That I don't think there are a lot of people who get to this point and who think, well, you know, I can't figure out anything else. I guess I'll just murder Toriel. And then feel pretty happy with themselves when they've done so. It's all going to be people who have, for the most part, tried everything they could think of to not murder Toriel, and then end up having their asses handed to them and do so out of desperation. And that crit is telling you that the game mechanics, the physical RPG combat environment that you are a part of, is there to reify that choice. The game is going to make the path to murder as slippery a slope as it can, both by making that process easier for you, even in ways that you don't anticipate, and in ways that undermine your free choice if you even start down that path, and by making the alternate path tedious. Tedious? Tedious? Oh my god. Oh my god. Could you stop? Oh, I'm regretting having not killed you now. And so forth. So, the mechanics to kill are streamlined and primed for success. The mechanics for peace are awkward and poorly explained and you have to step outside of the parameters of what is available to you in order to access them. So that's the lesson of that little crit, which is one of my favorite gestures that the game does. Let's talk to Flowey and see what he says after the triple reach around that we've just pulled here. And also, ideally, he should tell us whether eating my vegetables counted as a unforgivable sin. Let's see what he has to say. Maybe he's just tired of us by this point. Clever, very clever. You think you're really smart. In this world, it's kill or be killed. Able to play by rules, spread life of a single person. I bet you feel really great. You didn't kill anybody. Hey! Nice! You can eat a vegetoid, or at least take a bite out of it, and not be condemned to sin. That's good. Will you kill out of frustration? Will you give up entirely in this world? Let me inherit the power to control it. I am the prince of this world's future, i.e. I am the snake that is wrapped around the heart of the way that this game is designed. Here's the thing about Flowey, and this is what he's explaining to you when he says, I am the prince of this world's future. He has the power to save, and that means that he is the one with the power to control the game's dynamics. In this world, it's kill or be killed, he says, and you have to understand this as a reflection of the interface of the game, because he's the one who controls the interface of the game until you arrive, and therefore he's the one who has essentially designed it. He has decided what happens when you strike out in violence and when you don't. And so when you struggle against the game, and even when you struggle against some limitations of the game which have to have been not included by choice but by necessity, it's still part of the struggle against Flowey the Flower, which I think is genius. One of the things that I really like about video games, or one of the things that I really like in game design, is when the mechanical or shape limitations. That's a nice little foreshadowing moment. When the mechanical or shape limitations of the game are acknowledged by the narrative, and ideally are used by the narrative in such a way that it strengthens the overall gestalt, which is, I think, what is done here, and also in the limitations in the yes-no choice system, because it all fits together real well. And it feels a lot like, it feels a lot like, that's so nice. Let me come back and look at it. Yeah, Sans is powerful, yo. It feels like the story of this game. Whoop. It feels like the story of this game came after the mechanics, right? It feels like this game was written around what an RPG was and around what Game Maker was, rather than there having been a plot already in place in Toby's head. I just really appreciate that, because I think that's a great way of writing, and I think it's a way of writing that takes advantage of what games have to offer. And I think that for this episode, we're going to leave it on this pivotal moment right here. And when we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about Sans, and we'll talk a little more about sadness. And, of course, about the difficulty, in fact, the real craftsmanship that goes into writing a terrible, terrible joke.